Yeah, about 20 seconds. Okay, you're live now.
Welcome to the Virtual World's Best Practices in Education featured panel. Today we're going to be talking about connecting the past, present, and future of Second Life and other virtual worlds. With me today are Botgirl Questi, who's been writing about Second Life, real and unreal view of the world, identity and virtual lives for the past 6 years. Quite a few places out there you can find about Botgirl, and very interesting read. Botgirl was the opening keynote speaker for Virtual World's Best Practices in 2011. And Botgirl draws on about 15 years of hands-on technology business experience as co-founder of a 200-person agile software development company. Will Burns, in world as Aonix Aon. Will is a synthetic environment subject matter specialist with over 18 years of experience with marketing, design, research, and implementation for all areas of synthetic immersion environments. He's currently active in mobile game development, immersion video production, and advanced augmented reality concepts. As a published academic and Association for Computing Machinery and IGI Global, co-vice chair of the IEEE Virtual World Standard Group, and contributor to various industry collaboratives, he has a robust history in virtual environments. Terry Beaubois, in world as Tab Scott, is an artist, architect, researcher, and educator, and first experienced virtual reality in the early 1980s at NASA Virtual Reality Lab, a joint working group of NASA and the American Institute of Architects. That's from 1977 to 85. Terry received a NASA headquarters grant in 1985 to further study and report on aerospace technology with potential building industry application, VR, internet, email, 3D computer graphics. In 2005, he created his avatar Tab Scott in Second Life and taught one of the first ever courses of college credit using Second Life at Montana State University. A video about Terry's work can be found on the VWBPE website. Then we have Kevin Phelan, Phelan Corrimal in real life. Kevin Phelan is a business transformation architect currently on contract with the Canadian federal government and CEO and founder of Rockcliffe University Consortium. Excuse me. Kevin's experience spans education, business, and technology, including organizational design and strategy, application architectures, software development, and knowledge management. Kevin's been actively engaged with educational models for virtual environments since 2006. The topic we're going to touch on today has to do with, we're bringing together 4 experts who bring a diversity of backgrounds and insights about both Linden Lab's past, present, and future, and also virtual worlds in general. Each is an executive in their own right, having extensive experience throughout the industries that they're engaged in. Further, each is an outspoken proponent for the promotion and best practices, whether in management, education, strategy, marketing, research, and development. And the objective of this panel is to discuss the overall world of both Second Life and other virtual worlds. We're going to start with Tab Scott giving us kind of a history of where virtual reality has come from. Tab?
Thank you, Dirk. It's a real pleasure to be here. This is a great panel to be on, and I'm as excited about the potential for education in virtual worlds now as I was in 2005. There's still so much more we can all accomplish, and I think the benefit of taking a look back to the early days, it just sort of gives us some perspective as what the momentum is for this technology, and then how it can be used in education. And as you mentioned, my first experience was in the early 80s at NASA Ames Research Center here in Mountain View, California, being exposed to a headset-mounted VR. This is in the early 80s. We had wireframe images without hidden line removal, but it was a head-mounted display. It had this umbilical cord of wires going up out of the way, and it was attached to a data glove. So some of the issues early on were very similar to what is being experienced today in virtual reality and things with Oculus Rift and different technologies. But going back to 1980, the reason that NASA was looking at it, and I think this is important, there are so many different reasons to use virtual worlds, virtual reality technology in education, that we should allow for that wide variety of uses. It isn't like one use is correct and the other one is not correct. It's sort of like when I practice architecture, there's such a wide bandwidth of reasons to practice architects, of building types and things like that, that it's a delight to see the variety that can happen. So the same thing happens in the educational use of virtual reality. What NASA was trying to do is they were looking at how an astronaut would use this technology to operate a robot on the outside of the space station. I mean, there wasn't a space station at the time, so this was forward-looking technology. The run-up goes through a very technological exploration of what this virtual presence could be, as far as having an astronaut look through the eyes of a robot and repair the outside of the space station. It could cost about $100,000, $200,000 to send an astronaut outside. During the 80s, and we thought things were going to happen by 1985, 1986 that still haven't happened yet in virtual reality technology. One of the things the 90s brought us was the whole internet and the use of high-speed computers, and also trying to get to the regular computers with the internet and then the World Wide Web. And around the mid-90s, there was a effort to do VRML, which was the virtual reality version of HTML, and try to make it part of the internet. And there were efforts as early as 1990 to have the first virtual reality conference in San Francisco. So the times keep moving forward as we are now. But it's really important for people to understand that there is a momentum, and there are things that were thought of 10, 20, 30 years ago that still haven't been done yet, and consider whether those are some of the things that we want to do in moving forward. And I think Botgirl's going to pick it up from around the mid-90s and take it forward from there.
Okay. All right. Before I get into the history of MUDs and MOOs and MMOs and virtual worlds, I want to start by sharing some ideas from Marshall McLuhan that have really changed the way I think about technology. I've consumed his Kool-Aid, and it tastes really good. The first is that each new medium extends one or more meat space human capabilities, which sounds a lot more complicated than it is. The idea is really simple. It's just like the wheel extends the leg, the alphabet extends speech, paper extends memory, and so on. So it's like these new mediums provide us with almost like an evolutionary improvement that gives us an advantage over what came before. Better to ride in a wheeled cart than to run, for example. And this is what pundits call a disruptive change, a change that gives you a significant advantage. So for virtual worlds, thinking about what they extend, well, avatars extend our physical bodies. Real-time video and audio extends our voice and our sense of sight and hearing. And virtual identity extends what is usually a single wallet name identity. And what I believe is what transformed all of those capabilities into something that can be really actually life-changing is the open-ended nature of virtual worlds. It allows people to reinvent themselves, create new cultures, and bring to life just about anything they can imagine. So one more McLuhan idea that applies to this is that medium is the message that everyone's heard. So This means that the overall impact of a medium like, say, television has a lot more psychological and cultural impact than anything you watch on the television. So over time, it's everyone watching TV that makes a difference, not what we're watching. And that's because every medium shifts the balance of our senses and our perception. So regardless of like what we tweet or what we text, by using these tools all the time, we actually change the way we experience and interact interact with the world, not only while we're using those tools, but just in general. Now, there are also unforeseen consequences. And that's why critics claim that mediums like social networks and YouTube had screwed around with our attention spans. Some call it pushing us towards the shallows. But I believe that consistent immersion in virtual worlds has the same effect. Is my voice okay in world? I just glanced up at chat. Okay, great, thank you. So back to virtual worlds. So when I think about virtual worlds and why they haven't become common day-to-day for communication and collaboration, I think in my mind, their higher purpose, and by higher, I mean like higher on the Maslow scale, is a different question than their business purpose or their business value. And that virtual worlds are competing against other mediums that extend similar human capabilities. For example, I'm less likely to log into Second Life now that I can communicate with the same people on Twitter and Gtalk. Now, on the other hand, social networks extended avatar identities all over the internet. And, I don't think Ebby could have had the insights he needed to make that great speech he gave yesterday without the influence of Second Life users he met probably primarily over Twitter. So I think that's pretty significant how mediums work together. So anyway, that's my my little prologue leading up to this. Now some fast history, and then we can get on to the other panel members. So the first virtual world, there's some debate, but it's 1986 with Lucasfilm's Habitat, which was way before its time. It was a 2D world that ran on Commodore 64. In 1995, almost 10 years later, Active Worlds launched with, they ran through $15 million of funding and had big layoffs 2 years later. They relaunched and they're still alive today. I actually met the founder at a conference a couple of years ago. He's a really, really good guy. And he says they still have a legacy user base. 2002 Second Life launched with $19 million in funding overall. And it was the first virtual world that wasn't primarily, the first 3D virtual world that wasn't primarily a game. Yeah, Linden World was the original name. And I think that was actually even before 2002. And it was a sandbox world where users could create content themselves, which is very unique, and could interact freely. And it really took off. It had over 1 million registered users 4 years later by 2006. And their first millionaire made it to the cover of Business World magazine. At the peak of the hype cycle in 2008, a lot of people, including me, thought that the 3D internet might be a mainstream reality within a few years. And we all know that didn't happen. Just a few more virtual worlds. There's a lot of virtual worlds we don't pay attention to in Second Life very much. There.com raised $37 million. They launched in 2003. They closed in 2010, then reopened in 2012 as a service for 18 plus people. InView, which it's debatable whether that's a true virtual world, but they do have user-created content and over 3 million active users. They had 29 million in funding. Kniva launched in 2006. They're still around. They now have an app developer program that I believe interacts with Facebook. Multiverse launched in 2005. I was excited about them, an open source platform, but they closed in 2011. Twinity, wrap it up, Vast Park, Blue Mars, MyCosm, and now High Fidelity. So a lot of money spent, a lot of talented people, and Second Life is one of the few virtual worlds left standing. So I'll leave it now for the other panelists to fill in the blanks.
Thanks a lot, Botgirl. Will, I know you've done a lot of work in research in this specific thing. I think I saw a really good paper that you did. You want to take a few minutes to add in some of your experience of the history?
Sure. Speaking to Habitat is one of my favorite examples in that history. It actually spawned lessons learned from Lucasfilm's Habitat from Randy Farmer and Chip Morningstar, where they went through and they wrote this huge paper about about what it is, about what they learned through running Habitat. They learned a lot of interesting things from there that, believe it or not, some virtual worlds after that kind of paid attention to it, but on the whole they haven't. And that's kind of been interesting to me throughout a lot of research, where I say, well, if these guys had figured this out in 1989, 1990, and started writing this stuff down, this is stuff that we should be listening to. So anyway, going through the history, I think Botgirl had went straight to Active Worlds. Active Worlds, incidentally, was actually a throwaway project from Worlds Inc. There was Gamma and Alpha Tech at the time, and what happened was the actual artists, who are now staff members at Active Worlds, had actually banded together because Worlds Inc., I guess Tom over at Worlds had wanted to go with his Gamma Tech, which was just an update of the Worlds viewer now. And they were like, well, this is too good to throw away. So they kind of raised the money, at 15 million or whatever, and bought it out lock, stock, and barrel and started their own company with it, under Circle of Fire Studios and all that other stuff, which was, a really interesting history how that came about. That the throwaway of, the previous generation had, gone on to do something else, and then they just started laying people off left and right. But they're still around. Legacy users mostly, but a lot of white label universes and third-party servers that they license it out to are using it, like Virtual U up in New York State uses it for conferencing and business, which is really interesting. Expos and stuff like that, education, and that is you go into like there.com and Second Life, and interesting. What I see in all this is that a lot of it repeats, strangely enough. There's always like this parallel to it in history, like where our current generation now. So I find that's like the biggest thing that I found when I was writing the paper was like, hey, wait a minute, this sounds really familiar. And I would go back through the history and go, wait a minute. I start tracing it back, go, wait a minute. So history-wise, yeah, I mean, there's stuff like OnLive, not the OnLive we know now with the streaming service, but there was like OnLive Traveler or something that had voice in there back in the 90s, and VRML and X3D now was a standard VRML stuff, which was used by Blacksun Technologies to do Cybertown and everything. So yeah, it was going to be, and that's the mantra. It's going to be the future, every time it comes around. So that's my take on the history. I'll pass it off to Phelan on that one.
Thanks, Will. Let's now transition into the next question. I'm thinking, how would you describe the types of opportunities that have emerged during that time, whether they've been done well or not, and as well as any that were unrealized? Let's start with Botgirl.
Okay. In terms of raw numbers, MMOs kicked virtual world ass over the last 15 years in active users and revenues. There's reportedly about 400 million active MMO users, and according to Philip Rosedale a couple of days ago, there's about 1 million active virtual world users. So that's 400 times difference. They launched around the same time, both using kind of similar paradigms. The main difference is that one has the game is dedicated for games and gaming. But that said, in terms of actualizing human creativity, I believe Second Life was an unprecedented success, and it allowed hundreds of users over the years to create new art forms and identities and cultures from scratch. And ironically, we're talking about opportunities. I think that the open-ended aspect of Second Life, that's the catalyst for what makes it special and of great value, is the very thing that's kept it from greater success in the marketplace, because it's not easy to package and sell. The benefits aren't immediately obvious. It takes great commitment of time and energy. And the experience of why you love a virtual world is hard to communicate to someone who hasn't had it before. It's like trying to explain falling in love or the feeling you get when you see your newborn baby to someone that hasn't been through those things. It's really difficult. So Second Life's incredible early growth was fueled by people who were thrilled by simply experiencing being an avatar in a virtual world. They were building stuff, they're creating community, like those daring young men and their flying machines, or people who bought cars when you had to tinker with them constantly to make them work before there was the value chain of highways, gas stations, repair services, and all that. So the reason I think user growth stalled in Second Life was the combination of tapping out that early adopter group, and that was combined with concurrent changes in Linden Lab policy that started to seem to actually fight the user community instead of supporting it, and to focus on chasing new markets instead of delighting current users. I wrote a post that goes into detail on that. If anyone's interested, I threw out the link. So I believe that the key business opportunity Second Life missed at the peak of their success was the chance to leverage all that great attention they had to leverage the great things their existing community was doing, and to focus on developing on the requirements of their existing users, and to publicize what they were doing. And I would suggest you check out the Drax World Builders video series. Actually, I think I have that link somewhere here, or someone has it if you could throw it up. But Drax's series is a perfect example of what Linden Lab could have been doing all along to paint a picture of Second Lab that would probably bring in new people. Another opportunity they missed was, and it still exists, is to optimize Second Life for specific uses and market them to the appropriate people. For instance, there's a thriving live music scene in Second Life, so you should be able to click a banner ad, register, log in, find events, get there, and intuitively be able to do basic things like looking and moving around and chatting, maybe with a simplified client. And that same strategy could apply to role-playing, building, machinima, etc. And I think this is really compatible with the vision Abdi articulated in his keynote. So I'll stop there and let other people get in.
Okay, Will, do you want to add in your thoughts on this?
I mostly agree with Botgirl on that one. What my thought on that is that it's a toolbox. That's what it boils down to. You dress it as a platform and a toolbox. When I was listening to Ebby go through his keynote, a lot he was talking about was, well, you have these different special interests like vampires and sports and music venues and all that. And well, we can't really address everybody. We can't please everybody, and that's only partially correct. You can actually, but it has nothing to do with addressing everybody individually as their groups. It's about addressing the viewer and the experience as a platform. So in that context, say you have music, you have a lot of context for what this viewer does or what any of the viewers do. You have your interface, you have your chat, you have all this stuff, but you don't necessarily need it all depending on context. So what the viewer should be is context sensitive. What are you doing that needs all this stuff up all the time? And you go from there. Am I building? So if I'm building, do I have my interface there for just that? Instead of all these floating windows, do I have a dedicated space for that, like you have in Blender? Would it switch to that kind of view? Am I just walking around and chatting? Well, in that case, everything else can slide out of view. Am I doing music? Then I have my, am I doing role playing? And then I have, different things that could, be customized for that. And the viewer as a platform and the system as a platform could actually do that. You just need to figure out, how to allow that to happen. So that's how you actually address everybody. You take in their considerations for like what is the context of their use, and then say, well, can the viewer customize to that? So, can the viewer be customized to that? Not so much that you have a bunch of people programming it hard code, but can it be manipulated to a point? I think a good example was Active Worlds. Actually has that, where the world owners can actually define those HUDs and the whole screen if they want, and can call up what they can have that access to do that based on where you're at. So that could be the flexibility that Linden Lab or Second Life could learn from to allow your sim owners and whatever they're using it for to customize the viewer in world without actually having to code the thing from scratch. Just throw some commands at it or whatever, and have it pop up. And I think a good example was in where do you have these the HUDs popping up automatically in here. It's awesome. That's a good first step in that direction. It needs to be expanded on more. So that's kind of where I see that going to address all that stuff in the future. How do you address that to a larger audience, to the billion people, so to speak? Well, the bigger question is, to us, we're virtual worlds enthusiasts. We love this place. And as much as people might read my blog and stuff, I'm not against it. I don't think VR is dead. I think it needs to find its context. It needs to be context aware to the general public. So we need to answer those real questions. We can preach to the choir here all we want until we answer that to them. How is it relevant to you in a business sense? How is it relevant to you to educational sense? How is it relevant to you as just the person who wanders in, RPG, sex, whatever? How is it relevant to everybody? Why? We got to answer that on an everyday real life basis. When we do that, we make it easy and flexible instead of overwhelming with all these gadgets and stuff everywhere. Yeah, then it's going to start taking off real big. We're going to start really seeing that transcendence when you start becoming relevant to everybody else. And I think that's my biggest issue biggest hurdle going forward is how do you do that? How do you address that to everybody else instead of throwing tech at them and saying, go buy an Oculus? Hey, it'll have some success. It'll be a niche audience, but it's like a trampoline. You got one out back, you bounce on it. It's fun. It's exciting. Your friends want to come over and visit because you got a trampoline, but you're not going to bounce on it every day. Most people don't, and most people don't own a trampoline in their backyard. So how do we get past that?
I think we would all go pretty well damaged if we did the trampoline every day. Tab, picking up on that, Oculus and other things. Do you want to put in some thoughts here?
Sure. I think, building on what Botgirl and Will and Phelan and yourself have said, I just want to sort of go back to one of the core concepts of Second Life, because there is this, in the old days we were calling it the walled garden approach to a virtual world. And it's important to use both terms, virtual reality, which does contain the word reality, and virtual worlds, which some have become virtual cartoon shows that we can interact with. And both are wonderful. There are wonderful technological aspects to it. And also the other thing is there's a continuity that everybody has missed out on in staying with Second Life. It's just like what Shamara is saying as far as the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. Everybody has their experiences, and it's very, very difficult. Like everyone I know in Second Life, and I know people from all over the world in all different kinds of activities. And and here's Cindy coming in. I mean, there are some amazing people. Some of the most amazing people I have ever met in my life, I've met in Second Life. They're talented, they're capable, they're funny. This is a great environment, and it's difficult to convey that as well when you're talking to somebody who hasn't used Second Life. Like if you have to go to your principal, or if you have to go to an administrator and try to talk about how you want to use Second Life in your class. You end up talking to the IT department about blocking and all these things that are incredibly challenging situations. And then, the walled garden aspect of what we've all tried to bring things into Second Life and take things out of Second Life and receive various levels of cooperation or allowing it or helping us with that or blocking it. And part of the business model of Linden Labs and Second Life has evolved over time. I mean, in 2005, when I was working with like Philip and Corey and Eric and Pathfinder and all these different people, it's a different Linden Labs and Second Life than it is now. And now Corey, who wrote the Linden scripting language, is vice president of mobile at Facebook. And Joe Miller, who was vice president of technology for a while at Second Life, is with Sports Vision. And they're both doing incredibly amazing things. My perspective, and please don't hear this as a criticism, just as an opportunity from this point forward, Second Life could be the leading social media tool in the world. And for some reason, it isn't, but I do still think the potential is there. I mean, I think that we could, if you improved search in Second Life, you improved voice, if you improved reliability, if you improved all the things that we were talking about in 2005, I think that it would increase the chances of increasing the success of Second Life. And what I like to joke about is instead we have like breast physics and monsters that can smell meat. I mean, those are the two things that weren't even on the charts in 2005 as far as what people really wanted to see in a virtual world. So I think all of the potential that existed in 2005 and 2006 and 2007 and the heyday of Second Life, when we were like being featured in magazines and talked about things all over the world, still exists. The issue becomes the leadership at Second Life and at Linden Labs, and we're very, very hopeful about the new people. And the potential is there, and there's no question about it. And the largest asset, the most significant asset, the major asset that Second Life has is the avatars and the people that are in here. These are real people. These are really talented people. These are real people that are willing to contribute, looking forward to contribute. I think harnessing just a portion of that energy would send Second Life back into being the most significant technology in all sorts of areas, not just education, but certainly education. And it is a challenge to try to get students involved and stay in Second Life for all the reasons that many of us know. But I just want to talk about the potential is still here. And the people that are in here are just phenomenal. And I know some people that have sort of gotten burned out on Second Life and left or come back in or just sort of languishing. And the amazing thing are the people that are in Second Life. And if Second Life and Linden Labs can tap into that and figure out how to use what was originally called the Linden Love that was going around Linden Labs, if they can extend that to more of the people that are participating in Second Life, the sky's the limit. I mean, this technology is absolutely phenomenal. We all know it is, and we all know it can just be very, very attractive to large numbers of people, and we can be successful in here in education.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see where all this goes. I mean, there is so much going on now, and I think that kind of leads pretty nicely into a rather vague question that I'm going to pose to Phelan, which is, what are some implications that emerged from certain strategic positioning or products? Phelan?
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, as you know, Terry and Botgirl and Will have been going through, I've been actually making notes on the side here. Sort of threw everybody for a loop yesterday. You know, we've gone through so many years where Linden Labs' attitude has basically been, you know, don't say anything, don't show up, don't even go in world, right? Just pretend the user base is not there. And then all of a sudden yesterday, we all of a sudden got complete truth in advertising to a point of brutal honesty, which is I think sort of fairly refreshing on that particular aspect. But honesty in advertising doesn't necessarily mean that Second Life and Linden Lab are in an extremely competitive position in order to move this platform forward. I think there's been some interesting comments. I like the comment that Botgirl made earlier in terms of this idea of balance of perception, right? Because I think this sort of, and I agree with her on this in terms of this really is the thing that's going to drive whether or not Second Life is going to be able to become this leading social media platform, or it's not going to become this leading social media platform. If we look at some of the big innovations that have happened with regards to social media over the last several years, you look at YouTube, you look at Facebook, you look at World of Warcraft, you look at EVE Online, you look at the numbers that these virtual worlds, these MMOs have and social networks have. And the thing that's common across all of them is that the user base is emotionally invested in the outcomes of that particular platform. Right? I mean, there was an interesting article, and I have it here. Give me a moment just to grab the link. But there was an interesting came out a little while ago that was doing a comparison between EVE Online and Second Life. And some of the statistics that they have on there are absolutely amazing. And it just started to make me realize exactly what it was that Linden Lab gave up in terms of strategic opportunity back in 2009 when they started dismantling. Essentially, they started letting the lawyers run the show rather than letting the residents run the show. But I mean, if you look at some of the information that they've got here, I mean, if you compare the amount of disk space, overall disk space that's being used by World of Warcraft compared to Facebook, I mean, it's almost exactly the same, at least with regards to the percentage of disk space that's being used for photos that are being captured on Facebook. 1.3, 1.5 petabytes of information. That's huge in terms of what's out there. And I guarantee you that's not all text in terms of, not all pictures and video that's out there. But I mean, there are a lot of people that they're so emotionally invested in terms of what's going on that their wallets just basically follow. And I think this is one of the core strategic opportunities that Linden Lab right at the moment is missing out on. And it's the one that they gave up on back in 2009 when they started to dismantle the community liaisons, when they started to dismantle having Lindens in World, when they started to dismantle the opportunities that they were providing in order to help residents of Second Life to be able to create their own communities. I mean, again, we were talking earlier about walled gardens. I mean, Apple is the biggest example of a walled garden, and what happens when you allow that walled garden to fall, right? For decades, Apple had this policy in place that basically said nobody shall come onto the Mac except through this great big convoluted process. Whereas Microsoft basically said, here's the system, knock yourself out. Here's how you create a window, go to it. And they opened it up to the marketplace. When did Apple become successful? Well, they became successful not just with the release of iPod, which certainly kickstarted a lot of things, but as soon as they started making apps available and it became user-friendly and it became easy to do, then all of a sudden, all of that, then they started to pick up on the whole emotional vibe, because if you look at most of their commercials, none of them are about what the product actually does. They're all about how the product makes you feel. And so, when there are a lot of these things that I think are sort of driven off this concept in terms of, well, how do we get people emotionally invested in what's going on here? Let me come back to another thing that was being talked about a little bit earlier. I mean, I believe, and I apologize because I get this short-term memory thing going on, but we were talking about having the platform optimized for specific use, and I think it was Will that was talking about that. This idea of having the platform available, specific items for live music, for machinima, for fashion, for these other different things that we want to do. I mean, we keep talking about this idea of the platform being too complicated. It's like, oh my God, this is, it's the platform, it's the interface is the problem. The interface is the problem. The interface is the problem. The interface is not the problem. And it's, something, for the number of tools and everything else that we have here, the interface is really not the problem. Yes, there are areas in here that can be cleaned up. Yes, there are things that can be done better. I mean, every single platform has, their little quirks like that. But if you were to take this particular platform and allowed it to be opened up to resident-built APIs, imagine what we could do. You have a whole user community that's out there that's just dying to get the right tools put in place here, and they're willing to write them. So, why would you stifle that creativity? Why wouldn't you put in? Yeah, exactly. Instead of hard coding viewers for things like this, why wouldn't you allow the residents to come in and to contribute in this particular way? Not necessarily by giving them access to the back end of the code, but certainly give them access in order to define the API points to basically say, if you want to include a whole pile of new tools that are going to allow people to use camera movements and fade ins and fade outs and do environmental effects and all these other different things, here's the API that we're going to allow you access to in order to do all of those things. You write it. By the way, guess what we've got? We've got the Second Life Marketplace where we will let you sell the tools. Now, if that doesn't sound like a revenue model that is potentially similar to what's going on with WordPress right at the moment, where people have become so emotionally involved with WordPress that it's kind of hard to find a competing product that does as well for basic people that want to be able to create websites, right? And so here you have a series of, you take a look at something like WordPress. Here it is, you've got a basic blogging system where anybody can go through, they can become an expert on blogging, they can put up all kinds of stuff that's online in terms of their video and their images and everything else. And then there's all these plugins, and there's a pile of free ones, and there's a pile of them out there that you have to pay for. And it's sort of like, well, why can't we do that here? Why can't we open this up? Why can't we allow the residents to become emotionally invested, not only in the platform in terms of how we all interact with it, but also the ability to extend that. Right? I mean, obviously, people have built up substantial businesses within Second Life, and I mean, most people, will take a look at Stroker and a whole pile of other different people that have been in here that have made millions, right? And it doesn't have to be around land, right? I mean, there's all kinds of different things. There's all kinds of people that make a livelihood in here, selling everything from mesh buildings to fashion.
Well, I'm curious, Phelan, I'm curious about how this, you mentioned about the fact that Linden Labs was kind of like systematically locking people out a few years back. And I want to get somebody else's ideas on like a response to Ebby's, pronouncing however you pronounce that, Ebby's remark yesterday, which seemed to be kind of backtracking and re-acknowledging the rest of the people. Anybody else want to come in on that? Because these are some really interesting concepts.
I think from my perspective, watching it, he made a lot of great points, and that's, I'm very happy to hear a lot of what he was saying, where he said, well, I'm surprised. He was surprised that there was some sort of, policy where Linden's going to be in here with their Linden name. And I was like, wow. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of like the first thing where you say, why is that even true? Why did that even come about? So stuff like that, falls back to, ironically, that lessons learned from Lucasfilm's Habitat all the way back in 89, 90 from Randy Farmer and Chip Morningstar, where one of their lessons literally was work within the system. They say if you don't work within the system, you are breaking that fourth wall and you're not going to get as far as you want, or you're going to have that backlash. It's just not going to work out the way you want it to because you're breaking the immersion and the presence. So not heeding that has caused them, a bunch of grief on their end. It becomes disconnected. You got the us and them mentality, and that was pervasive for a number of years now, where there's that us and them mentality. Even when you look at premium accounts, there's the us and them. They say, you guys have sandboxes in the community. Well, we're going to make premium sandboxes. And you can do this. It's the us and them again. You can have whatever you want on the marketplace, but we're going to give you premium gifts that you can only get for here. And a lot of those premium gifts didn't really add up to what you would get just as a free member. I mean, I think even with the packages they're putting on Amazon, I kind of chuckled at it because, the hoverboard, it took me 3 minutes to go on Marketplace and find a free one that was 100 times better and more, more robust for free. I said, well, and it only works for people who are new and don't know any better. But when they get in here and they find they got a house, they go, wow, this is great. I got a house. And then like a week or two later, they find out there's a land rental market and there's a gajillion houses that are 1,000 times better they could just buy on Marketplace. And they go, well, why am I paying for a premium? So, I mean, these are the types of things that, listening to Eb, yes, he is looking to address those things. Absolutely fantastic that he wants to do that.
Well, I think that's really going to go a long way. It sounds like he's really rethinking this. Tab, you want to add in?
Yeah, I think saying something is one thing and doing something is another. I think we should all, keep our eyes on what Linden Labs and Second Life does. In 2005, I used to visit Linden Labs twice a year, and Philip was fantastic. We brought my whole class in there. He talked to him for 45 minutes. I tried to explain to them, look, you're meeting the Elvis of virtual reality, and it was much more open. After a few CEOs literally that came in and knew nothing about Second Life. I don't even know how they were selected, quite honestly. I don't think that it's like a regular company that if you just have experience at, Procter & Gamble, you can come in and you can run Linden Labs and Second Life. I think knowledge of the product is very, very important. Experience in world is very, very important. One of the things I saw in Linden Labs when I'd visit there, a lot of the people that work there they saw it as a job. They didn't go into Second Life and do things. And then as someone mentioned earlier, there used to be community policies. There used to be an education community with Pathfinder, or Robin had some different kinds of communities. It used to be much more engaged and involved with the people that are participating in it. And then when they pulled back and they sort of took this, we're going to be a virtual game like Electronic Arts and things like that, and you couldn't meet with them and they weren't really interested in input. I think a lot of people felt isolated. There's such a huge creator community in Second Life, and as everybody from like Cindy Bolero is probably one of the most experienced people in here, and she's saying the interface needs to be easier. We need to be able to bring people in and have new people. I worked with, I do a lot of beta testing of hardware and software, and I worked with Adobe. I was a Photoshop 1.0 tester in 1990. And then I went to teach Photoshop in 2005 at a university, and my students were going, this is the hardest software we've ever learned. And I went, what? Photoshop is easy. And what I realized was the difference between learning Photoshop when it had 3 tools, and then they added a couple of tools a year, and then the new people come in and just move the controls around as if that's improving the product. And you can't find anything for a while. So you're actually less capable of using the software than you were the year before. I realized that the students were trying to use something that was very difficult. And they all asked for this sort of scaled beginner, intermediate, and power user versions of controls, and we actually presented that to the Photoshop team, and it was the first time. We were Adobe 100 lab, so we were one of the top 100 labs in the world that was giving feedback to Adobe as to how they can improve their product. And then they fired the 12 people that I knew at Adobe all on one day, and they became a different company. So we have to keep our eye on what they do and what they don't do. I think saying something is wonderful. I hope it's all true, and I hope things straighten out and fly right from this point forward. But all the people that know and love Second Life want to be able to contribute and benefit from the environment. And, it's got to be more than people that are designing hair and shoes. I mean, we've got to be able to, expand the success in markets and non-markets, because education isn't really trying to sell something. It's just trying to expose people to information and improve their thinking process, or like Botgirl was talking about. I mean, I still teach McLuhan and Bucky Fuller and all sorts of things, because it's still good information, and you could use Second Life to teach those things really well. So let's see what they do. That's what I'm waiting for. Proof will be.
Oh, absolutely. And so, getting to your point of the interface, I know that a lot of people have switched to Singularity just because it has the very old interface. I know I still use it because I got used to the Second Light, the Linden Viewer 1 point something. Botgirl, you want to sound in on this? I think you may be muted.
Well, while we're waiting for Botgirl, actually, I'd like to step in for a moment, if you don't mind. I love the analogy of Photoshop, because I mean that so ties into the way you look at different. Some of these MMOs tend to work. Especially the classic example being World of Warcraft. I mean, when you go into World of Warcraft, they don't give you the 3,000 buttons that you need in order to be able to do player versus player exchanges at level 90. They start you off with one button, and they say, "Here, click this." Right, and so I mean, when you're talking about the complication of coming in and working with these particular types of things. That whole aspect. I mean, I understand where people are saying, I want things to be simple. I mean, this is what the iPod did, right? It's sort of like, here, we'll give you one button, just scroll through this, right? And you can find your music. People understood that, right? But once you get into the whole complexity in terms of what's here, eventually you have to start adding in the new features. You have to start adding in the new aspects, how to go through the inventory, how to work with different things. If you want to start building businesses, if you want to start making music, if you want to start doing machinima, right? I mean, you have no choice but to allow the interface to become more complex. And this is why I'm saying the interface itself is not really the problem, because the interface is really actually quite simple, considering how much power it gives you to do things with inside this environment.
Yeah, I would have to agree on that one. How many people are? This is a thought I had probably about 6-7 months ago, that I was working on with my friend John in World here. How many people, by a show of text here, are aware of what Stumble Upon is? Give me a general idea. Okay, so one of the questions that we have, the first user comes in, and the difference between a virtual world and a video game like MMO is that you go into an MMO and they give you a task. You've got your quests. You know what you're doing when you come in. When you come in here, it's pretty much on your own. So, and you have your search up there, and you have your destination guide, but that's all usually hand-picked stuff, and that doesn't really tailor much. One of the thoughts I had a while ago is, what if you came in here and you could hit a button? Or it would recommend stuff, and the more you used it, the more it would actually tailor to the person. So, like, if you're interested in certain things, you can, yes and no. Let's say, yeah, and it would learn what you like personally. So it would tailor the destinations and interests to you. So you wouldn't have to sit there and scratch your head and say, what am I interested in? Over time, it would get used to you and start going, hey, you might like this, music venue, or hey, there's this thing over here, or this art thing or whatever, and it would pick up over time. And if you got bored in here and said, the number one question, what do I do? I pop in, and I heard that a lot of times. Like a suggestion box, kind of like Stumble Upon, where the destination guide's empowered by keeping track of your interests. Social media does that now. That's how they tailor your feed to you, and that's how they tailor apps and stuff to you. So Second Life could do something like that. So where the new user comes in, they say, well, I have no idea what the hell is going on. I mean, that's the number one thing I hear when people come in. I have no idea what I'm doing here. And I go, well, look around. And that experience, that new user experience, if you could tell them, click that button, they go, oh, and it'll suggest something. Go, oh, and if they like it, they like it, and if they don't, they don't. And it starts, if they ever ask that question, they can always find something new and interesting among the sea of stuff and the sea of content and experiences in here that, quite honestly, we're never going to be able to see it all. That's something we used to talk about in Active Worlds, where the size of California and all the stuff that was ever built in just Alpha World, you're never going to see it. And to this day, I've never seen it. I've seen the map, just no way I'm going to see everything in there. So.
Well, I'm curious, building on that, Will, what do you think, or what do you feel are some of the immediate goals for driving change and mobilization over, let's say, the next 12 to 18 months? Like what else is coming? And let's kind of frame this as sort of a friendly suggestion to what Second Life might want to listen to in their plans for where we're going.
Mobilization in terms of, say, overall. Yeah, overall, basic thing I would, friendly suggestion would be, we have a great set of panelists up here. I mean, some really huge breadth of knowledge and understanding in history. What I would suggest right off the bat is a little bit of homework. Learn. This is what the education conference is about. We're about learning. So that's my first recommendation. If I was going to look at that and say, hey, look, there's a history, there is a lot of parallels, and if we want to avoid the pitfalls and do something really cool, we got a lot to learn. I mean, you can learn a lot from where we've been to figure out where we're going, and that's a good step right there. Learn the history, or we're going to repeat it, and that's just an obvious kind of thing. In an 18 to 24 month kind of thing, it's that user experience idea. It's the treating it's getting past the identity crisis, and that's what Ebby said. We can't be we have a problem. We can't really cater to everybody, but you can if you actually look at it from a platform. So you address the platform itself. What is the missing links in here? What are these things like new user experience? You come in and nobody in a first question is, what do I do? There is no plot because it's a virtual world. They're not spoon feeding you anything. So introduce something like that stumble upon button for your destinations, where it learns what people like and starts spoon feeding them stuff on their request. Hey, I don't know what to do. Is there something cool? Hey, there's this new place over here, and it starts building that up. It also builds traction for and audiences for things that are in here and content creation kind of audience that is interested in that stuff over time. So that's a good idea. When it comes to stuff like Oculus integration, yeah, you should do it. Absolutely. Would I bet the farm on it? Nope, not even close. It's a peripheral. It's like saying we support a mouse or a space navigator or something. It's not something to ride everything on as a future. So talking all that up at this point is probably not a good idea. They're still in their hype phase. They're still in their valuation, and until they actually get real numbers for product on the shelf, and even by Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg is not expecting that for another 4 or 5 years. He's expecting that to really hit in 5 years. So don't build up so much. Don't ride the hype. As for everything else, yeah, I mean, it comes down to, figuring out your identity crisis past your virtual world's history, and I would say figure out your premium accounts, give it what added value really means. Don't learn lessons. If you learn the history, you got lessons learned from Lucasfilm's Habitat. So it says working within the system and all that other stuff. So the premium accounts and stuff are a direct violation of those lessons learned. Work within the system. Don't poach your own community. If their community is doing it, don't you as a company shouldn't be doing it to compete with them. Don't create walled gardens. Learn the sociology aspect and the community aspect. Pulling something from Pathfinder on that one, where he said that in his recent blog. It's more than just technology. You can't just throw tech at it and say this is going to solve the world. You actually have to understand the sociology and the community and the interaction aspect before you can start making those. Going forward, how do you address not just people in the world but in the real world? How do you convince them that this isn't a niche product? How is it relevant to them when they've never stepped foot in here? And those are questions that all got to be answered in like the next 18 to 24 months. Go back and fix everything, get your history in order, and then figure out how you're going to actually not so much solve it, because you can work on that to solve it, but answer the question instead of dodging it with pie in the sky kind of figures with Philip Rosedale going, oh, there's 1 billion users, we can do that. No, that's all pie in the sky stuff. Let's keep our head out of the clouds and feet grounded for a bit and really answer stuff.
Well, I would second that. This is Tab Scott. The accidental imposition of Linden Labs into certain markets over the years has created an environment where a lot of users are reluctant to start something in Second Life because they're afraid it's just going to be taken over. Whether it's Lumiere Noirs, Ivory Towers, whether it's the banking industry in Second Life and the money exchanges. There's a lot of areas where it seemed like Linden Labs hadn't gotten their own revenue model solidified, and so they were sort of sniping at things that were successful. And I don't mean this as a negative criticism of them. I'm just thinking of picking up on what you just said, Will, as far as building an area that allows for success within the creative communities. Because right now, everybody feels like, wow, if I create something in Second Life, I don't even own it. They do. There needs to be a rethink, push the reset button on the relationship between Linden Labs, Second Life, and all the users that creates a healthier, more trusting environment, and one where everybody can flourish, not just if you have a great idea, you can find Linden Labs building houses for free and totally taking the legs out beneath your market of coming into Second Life and designing buildings. And again, I don't want anyone to get their feelings hurt over these comments. I think if we don't deal with these issues, it'll be worse than if we sort of face them and then use this opportunity of a new CEO to try to not blame anybody, but say, okay, let's all work toward making it better. Because the creative community in here is really what Linden Labs needs to benefit from, not just the programmers and the coders that live in the walled community of Linden Labs, but the people that are inside of Second Life. That's the real strength.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to kind of summarize that, it's just my phrase has always been, Linden Lab should do the things that Linden Lab can do, and if the community is already doing it, that's clearly something that Linden Lab shouldn't be doing. You shouldn't be, crossing, mixing, or sniping, as you said. If you can do it as a service, do the unique things that as a company you can do. I think SL Go is actually, and this is going to sound like blasphemy coming from me because I've been kind of stomping on SL Go, but SL Go is a good idea. Wrong context. Excellent idea, bad execution. And the reason I say that is because something like that streaming, to get you what it offers is good. The streaming ability to turbocharge and give you the full, balls to the wall kind of graphical experience of SL on a tablet. All right. That's good. That as an offering is good. Wrong context. Now, if that was rolled into like premium, that's an added value that only Linden Lab does. Nobody in the community is doing that for you. That's a Linden Lab kind of on live, unique added value. So if you're in your viewer and you have like a crappy laptop, like say me, because I've blown through like 3 or 4 of them right now for other reasons. But if I have a crappy laptop, I've got everything set to nothing right now. But if I had a premium account and that would enable me to use the streaming aspect, the $10 a month, you know what? That would be awesome because that's an added value. That gives me a reason to buy premium because then I can have all the graphical fidelity without killing the computer. See, that's perfect. That's an idea of context-aware services that aren't poaching the community or sniping, as we had said, and that's kind of where they need to start thinking. As an example.
We'll turn a couple more ideas.
And Eb says that. Before you get into that, Mel says, Eb does emphasize that SL Go is not an LL product. However, and this is my only contention really for the entire keynote, he distanced himself from it, and he doesn't have any premise to do so. He's not entitled to do so. If they authorized their trademark and usage and SL name and logo, they are intrinsically linked to them. So you can't just distance yourself and go, oh no, talk to somebody else. that's your actual, I don't know any other third-party viewer that is slapping the SL logo on it. It's not called SL Firestorm. It's not called SL Singularity. It's not called any of that. Those are the company they chose to authorize to do that. So you're writing your name and your company, perception, and whether it's good or bad on them. So if they do bad, you can't just say, go talk to them. Oh no, it's your name's on it. Just like if Namco was to license or authorized a third party to do something, and excuse my vulgarity here, if they went out and made Pac-Man vibrators, Namco would be on that the next day. They'd be, something's wrong here. Or if they made something that was putting Namco in a bad name, in a bad light, they wouldn't say go talk to them. They'd be on the phone with them saying, look, you're making us look bad, and we are tied to this because our logo's on it. So when I talked to Eb, I actually made the comment on Twitter to Eb, and Eb said, no, go talk to them. We didn't make it. I said, no, I'm talking to you because this is your company, your logo, and your perception, your public perception. And if it's negative, it falls back to you. Just like the comments on SL goes, going SL, Linden Lab has forsaken us and blah, blah, blah. It goes back to you because your logo and name's on it. So
Sure.
you have to suck it up and say, yeah, we got to talk to them. You can't just pass the buck. And that was the only thing that really irked me about the situation. It's like, look, he's talked about verticals and pigeonholing SL as verticals, and we got to avoid that. But when taken to task in that aspect of, third party pigeonholing you and making, with a negative backlash, what did you do? You didn't curb it. You passed the buck. That's the only thing that bugged me about it.
Yeah, let's go to Botgirl, and again, this is on the next 12 to 18 months of what you think is going on.
Okay, I think that I forgot who said it, but the Second Life user community is Linden Lab's most valuable asset. That's where all the revenue comes from.
Well, in fact, I think Ebby made that comment yesterday as well.
Well, it must be true. and that's also where all their content comes from. So I would suggest in the next 12 to 8 months, as he described, is reconnecting with your core users and prioritizing your development on their biggest headaches and addressing their most pressing issues. My second priority would be fixing the new user experience. I disagree that the UI is not an issue. I think the UX, if there's one thing I've learned in being part of hundreds of development projects as far as seeing how they move forward, is user experience is 80% of the battle. And without immersion in a virtual world, without the sense that you're inside the virtual world, there's really not a lot of value to it. And to achieve immersion for a new user can take 8 hours. I've heard people tell me it took them a month. So when you're trying to convert someone who's trying Second Life for the first time, there's a lot more pain they have to go through to get there. And I think that there's not a lot of belief that there'll be a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So InView, for example, has an incredible way that takes users hand by the hand, step by step through the new user process. So it's not just the interface, it's also the processes that connect new users. Someone else was saying with the communities they're in. InView actually gives people some money to buy clothes as they go through. I'm not a fan of game mechanics, but if they're used well for a new user, you can really motivate people to go through the steps they need. If it was me, I would take a completely new look at the UI. I would bring in a fresh eyes, and I would rethink it from scratch, to tell you the truth, for new users. I guess one more thing related to this is, a few people mentioned it, is that the feedback loop between Linden Lab and the community started getting broken around 2008 and really hasn't been repaired since then. I think one lesson of mobile app development that makes it very clear, and also Twitter is a good example, is that technology advances by incremental development with feedback from users informing development decisions. Most of the stuff we love about Twitter was from users figuring new things out, the developers listening, and putting it back into the platform. So unless you're paying attention to what's going on in the world and the innovations people are making, you're not going to hear that and listen to it. So, finally, I would say they need a corporate change management program to, one, institute true agility within their organization, which involves understanding your customers, being able to see things from their point of view, and then being able to move your product forward in that way. I can leave that here.
Okay, well, some really good ideas. Now I'm going to turn back to Phelan. And Phelan, how you want to weigh in on this?
Well, I think it's interesting because I sort of want to split this into two different segments, and I think maybe we'll talk about the second one a little bit later. But what I think they will do over the next 12 to 18 months versus what they should do are going to be two completely separate, different things. And if you had asked me this question 2 days ago, actually, you did ask me this question 2 days ago. Considering Ebby's talk in the middle, my answer would be drastically different. I think based upon the admissions that we're hearing from Linden Lab at the moment, in terms of where they're recognizing that the core value proposition that they've lost as part of Linden Lab is the relationship with the residents. In order to gain that back, they're going to have to essentially undo what's been done since 2009. So they've got about 5 years of past history, which now has to be realigned internally inside Linden Lab itself. Just by having Ebby coming up on a podium and saying, we recognize we screwed up, please forgive us, we're going to make things better, again, doesn't mean that that's fixed the problem. It's an admission. It's like the drunk coming in and saying, I admit I'm a drunk. But, unless they're willing to actually show changes in patterns of behavior, then, where are we really going with this? And I think one of the things that we're going to need to see is we're going to need to see some realignment of the organization in order to prove to the residents and prove to everybody else that, in fact, they are capable of making those particular changes, not necessarily putting things back to the way they were, but putting things back on a more even keel such that the relationship that existed between the communities and Linden Lab as a company start to have more cohesiveness moving forward. And I think based on what Ebby was talking about yesterday, over the next 12 to 18 months, I think that's probably going to be their first and foremost priority beyond anything else. Now, in relationship to what, again, what they should be doing, because here's the other shoe. I think Linden Lab has got another big problem on their hands, and that is the fact that they have, since about 2008, which was when the last realistic major upgrade to Second Life was ever made. Because they've introduced some things since then. Yes, they've stabilized the platform and they're trying to make the platform better, but that doesn't put them on a better marketing foot than they were inside 2008. Essentially, it's the same product. So we've had 5 to 6 years of Linden Lab standing still, not showing any growth, not showing any, I understand they're trying to fix the stuff in the back end, and that's all well and that's good, but there's no evidence of them growing in any particular direction. You look at companies like Cloud Party that got bought out for their strategic assets. You look at Oracle Oculus Rift that got bought out. Why are these companies getting bought out and Second Life isn't? I think that's a very realistic question to be asking. And to me, it would seem like the reason why large companies buy out smaller companies is there's a number of different reasons for it. One is simply to get rid of competition. And certainly that happens all over the place. And we won't talk about the electric car and the 13-month battery because that'll just open up a can of worms we don't want to get into. But you look at what's being bought up right at the moment, and what's being bought up is intellectual property. So, and I know a while back there was some talk going around that a lot of what makes Second Life work was really based upon open source information that was essentially strung together, hence the reason why the back end of this is all spaghetti code, and then a lot of patching done around it. But what is really core in terms of patentable with regards to Second Life? Right? Well, I mean, the fact that it comes together in as nice a package as it is certainly is an advantage. But when large companies buy out smaller ones, they're going after a couple of different things. They're going after knowledge, they're going after patents, they're going after resources.
Well, it certainly ties in with your earlier comments about like WordPress and the plugin, the plethora of plugins. But let's come back to the second. I'm curious to see if Tapscott has some more things to add.
Yeah, I think that in sort of combining these issues of what the direction for Linden Labs and Second Life is for the next year or two, and what the relationship between education and Second Life or virtual worlds is, it's really important to clearly state that this tool, the virtual technology, the virtual reality, the virtual worlds tools could be the leading, most important tools that we use in education. And as Serena's pointed out and other people are commenting, education is more than just what's happening in the schools. We're now talking about pre-K. We're talking about continuing education. We're talking about lifelong learning. And so it can be the center of how to do that. I found that using a virtual tool to teach, I experienced both sitting in the classroom with students and while they're on their laptops in Second Life, and also teaching remotely from another state while they're on their laptops learning. And I can tell you, we're just scratching the surface. I think the exciting thing is to really, for the education communities, to focus on education, less so whether they're in a traditional building or a modern building, which I've been to so many education meetings where things wander off course very easily, and I think we can all do that. So I think we should look at Linden Labs as human too. They've wandered off course many times with what they should be doing with Second Life or not, and it's sort of our job, and this is what we're doing here. We're trying to recalibrate, re-register, redirect this wonderful opportunity of using this technology in an international educational sense that really has no boundaries, and it's really quite remarkable. And we need to be working together. And Phelan made so many good comments about how Linden Labs could restructure their whether it's attitude or position or whatever. And there's a lot of comments being made on the technology and how out of date it is. And the cloud didn't exist really when they were getting started. So the idea of even the inventory management in Second Life is almost painful to watch. So there's lots for us to do, but I think as an education community, if we focus on education, and if Linden Labs could guarantee education, a relationship, so they weren't, giving us a discount 1 month and then taking it away from us the next month. I mean, we all need a little bit of stability, as exciting and as flexible and as changeable this technology is. I think the working relationships can be improved remarkably from both sides. I mean, Linden Lab takes a lot of hits, and they almost have to become immune to the criticism and the negativity that all of us wonderful avatars can provide them. But at the same time, most of the comments made today, and most of both in the chat and in the from the seats here, are all well intentioned. And the goal is to improve it. If Linden Labs and Second Life had a goal statement and a real clear direction for where the technology was going, even if they could do it for a year, 2 years, I think that would help to really clarify what we're all doing in here and what we can expect to have happen.
Thanks, Tab. We've been looking, just for the last few minutes, we've been looking at the next 12 to 18 months for what we think Linden Lab ought to be thinking about. But I want to extend it a little bit now, and let me throw some thought in here. I want to extend beyond just Linden Lab, beyond just Second Life. And Graham Mills, for instance, posed a question, says that he missed a lot, but as an open sim educator, he's curious whether the panel thinks SL should engage with OpenSim in any fashion. Of course, it depends on your objectives, because educators who do blitz orientation in 30 minutes and then focus on an academic task, they're going to have a different point of view. So let's just take a couple minutes each and go left to right. So Tab, you want to weigh in on that first?
Yeah, I think in the long run, am I on? Hello? I think in the long run, there should be a point. It's like in sailing. You don't sail directly at the point all the time. You tack back and forth depending on how the wind is blowing. And I think we should allow Linden Labs and ourselves that kind of flexibility. But I think we should have a point on the horizon that we, in general, all agree that we're heading toward. And I think it's not that complicated, and it's not that difficult to sort of arrive at a general statement as to where we're all headed. And I do think the relationships are as important or more important than the technology. Maybe let's say they're equally important. So for 2 years out, I mean, we're looking at things like Oculus Rift, Google Glass, a lot of technology. Facebook is advancing. They just spent $2 billion on Nest, which is a thermostat that's controlled using iBeacons. I mean, I think we should all say, hey, we want to be able to play with those things in Second Life. Can we have iBeacons in here? Can we have beacons? Can we have thermostats? Can we have functional things as well as fun, artistic ways to play with it? Because the creative group in here turned loose with, I don't think Linden Labs has to figure everything out. I think they've been trying to too tightly controlled. As much as there is lip service, and this is a good example of what I differentiate between somebody saying they're doing something and somebody doing something. This line that everybody in world determines what Linden Labs is, it's just not true. I mean, if you try to make your own island, you can't. If you try to, you can modify the terrain a little bit. Linden Labs is in play and really controlling what does and doesn't work in Second Life. So I'd like to lift that veil and talk directly to the Wizard of Oz, as opposed to pretending along with them that the users are in charge and everything in here is created by the users. And then you read the terms of agreement and you find out that every user can have all this stuff taken away from them at any minute. So I think we just need to create a comfortable present, and then have a clear idea of some general things way off in the future on the horizon, some very specific goals for 6, 12, and 18 months out. And I think there's going to be more than we can do. So there's always a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 approach in master planning. And I think for education, if we can get our priorities together, that would be a wonderful thing. And then present them to Linden Labs and present them in Second Life and talk about, here's what we would like to see happen. I think they need that I think if every community did that with Linden Labs, and Linden Labs says, okay, we're finally going to relax and allow everyone's success in here, realizing that, guess what? It's just like the real world. There are all sorts of things going on. And if we try to, rigidly fix what people can and can't do in Second Life, we're going to create the problems we're having. We're not going to solve them.
Well, I think Ebby's comments yesterday, we can hope, was actually the wizard pulling back the curtain a little bit. So we may be seeing the man behind the curtain. Botgirl, your thoughts?
All right. I have a hard time seeing far into the future. I will reinforce my contention that the most important thing is to fix what's broken. Secondly, improve the new user experience. The big question I have that I don't think we'll be able to find out is how bad their code base is. How ugly is it? I suspect that they aren't going to be able to be competitive with all the new platforms that have come out. There's probably going to be a feeding frenzy of funding after the Oculus acquisition. So that's the big unknown to me. So hypothetically, if they're only really able to milk their platform along for as long as they can be competitive, that's a very different story, whether they really think they can improve it to the point where they can take advantage and be competitive with new platforms. I don't know if anyone on the panel has any insight into the state of their code and how ugly it is and how it's architected, or whether they had any kind of internal or third-party review. Anyone have any insight into that?
As far as I know, right at the moment, their code's a mess. Apparently, it's a complete disaster. It's part of the reason why this whole thing, when we were screaming for more groups to go from 20 groups to 42, it took them as long as it did in order to put that particular change in place, simply because the way all the code was structured in the back end, to just simply increase it by one group was a nightmare. So they actually had to go in and restructure that almost from scratch in order to get that to work.
Right.
And in some cases, it still doesn't work.
Yeah, from a historical perspective, I don't know specifically like tab dubs, but I can say from a historical perspective, it was the same issue that led to where active worlds ended up. They had the same exact problem, and a lot of that stemmed from in the beginning when they were first coding it. They didn't really put anything into it. They really didn't put any forethought into, hey, what if this thing really does blow up? What if this thing really does get huge? What if we have to make changes? Is this modular? And active roles didn't take that into account, so they ended up with the same exact situation. Spaghetti code, where putting anything into it, was going to be a monumental kind of thing. It was going to be ridiculous. And what I had suggested back then to them was, you really just need to sit down and make a clean rewrite. You need to go from scratch and and build a new version.
Well, Will, following from that, let's go to your summary.
Well, his summary is roughly in line with everybody else. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with Botgirl and Tab, and even before Phelan says anything, I'm probably going to agree with him, because you get into these great discussions on occasion. So generally speaking, going into the future, I agree with Botgirl saying, "Oh, hey, is this going to be something that says, are you just trying to milk it, or are you looking to be competitive?" If you're looking to be competitive, then those hard questions, again, feet on the ground, head out of the clouds, start answering questions, the hard ones, the ones you've been avoiding. Get rid of the identity crisis, figure out who you are. What is your, who you are is, as a company, is something that hasn't been answered. We have all these initiatives. I saw in the chat here, somebody had said that initiatives that, kind of spur of the moment, or, today we're a game company, tomorrow we're an enterprise company, this day we're doing this, and this, feet back on the ground. You are a virtual world company. You are a platform. And if you want to extend that, you need to start treating it like a platform. Stop trying to be a content creator. Stop trying to be anything but the provider of a really robust platform to let people unleash their own creativity, to use it as they please, because the use cases in a virtual world are measurable. I mean, I've seen amazing stuff here. I've seen breedable shoes in here. I mean, the amount of creativity use cases is just mind-boggling. Don't pretend like you're going to come up and start force-feeding people use cases. If somebody says, I have an education use, okay, figure out what it's going to take to empower that as a platform. Start thinking like a platform, not a game company, not, this, that, and the other. Don't be a chameleon. Don't try to be jumping on everybody else's bandwagon saying, hey, me too. Just say, we are unique. And that's the huge thing. We are unique. This is its own little thing. It's a virtual world. It's a virtual environment. It is a platform for creation. How does that, now the question is, for the next 18 months, how do you, as a company, treat this as a platform, make it robust so it empowers all those use cases? Even, I would say even into augmented reality. Like, how would this Like here's a question that's actually come up because I've been dealing with places like Semblance AR and Infinity AR and stuff. The question that I brought up was, okay, we have AR now. What if you could do in real life what you can do in Second Life? What if you can start resin stuff in real life with a pair of glasses and walk around it and it's 3D? What if you can have your mirrors in your living room? What if you can build using this platform? What if it empowered that? So instead of chasing like Oculus Rift, man, you could be doing some amazing. You could literally be changing the world right now, and that's the kind of initiative pet project that if you got 6 years to make video games and throw money at that and buy up other companies, you got time and money to do this. You got time to change the world again, and that's where Second Life, in its pinnacle, was doing. It was world changing. The entire world was on this. We were looking at this going, this is the greatest thing ever, and businesses and CNN and companies were just, it was a frenzy. Yeah, that's what you can do again. Change the world. Innovate. Do something amazing again. Make it a platform that empowers everything and everybody.
Well, given what a lot of people have been rezzing in world, I'm not sure I'm ready for that, but it could be pretty interesting to see.
I mean, obviously you don't want that out of context, but you can see the potential there. I mean, like the amount of just everything that could be done. Yeah, we can do it all in here. What if that was just a real life kind of thing, like a layer in real life? This is the sort of platform here that could empower that.
Certainly.
That's the kind of future I see.
Yeah. All right. So let's go to Phelan. Phelan, you want to give your summary?
Well, I guess there's two aspects here, because the original question that you asked was with regards to Second Life and OpenSim, and somehow we've gone to a summary. So let me work on the summary stuff, and if we need to come back to OpenSim, we can do that in a bit. I'm sort of going to take a little bit of a different tack here, because I think I'm sort of in agreement with everybody else. I'm sort of not, because I mean the Linden Lab has a huge challenge in front of them. I mean, they have given up 6 years of competitive advantage to every other competitor that's out there, including OpenSim. And thankfully, from, I guess, the Linden Lab standpoint, nobody has been able to step up and do what Linden Lab did. And I think that is probably the only thing that's really sort of saved them at this point, because if anybody had come out with anything competitively similar or better, that we wouldn't be having this conversation here. We would be having that conversation there. So I think they just happen to have lucked out in terms of the fact that the rest of the industry hasn't managed to progress, hasn't managed to get it. But at the same time, I mean, in order for them to build upon what they've got right at the moment, absolutely they're going to have to re-architect the entire back end of this thing. I think they really do need to focus on tool integration. I mean, there are tons of things that we need in here that are just simply not available. I mean, one of the easiest ones to pick on is peer-to-peer file sharing. I mean, I cannot simply drag a file off my desktop and hand it to another avatar. You talk about education, business purposes, that is the most basic of services that you need to be able to offer in order to get businesses back in here. Can I give you, right? Can I load a PowerPoint presentation in here without having to create it to a whole pile of JPEG images, upload it, try to figure out how the hell to get the damn viewer to work, right? I mean, this is basic stuff. Business does this every single day. And education does this every single day, and we still don't have the tools to do it in here. So there needs to be a whole pile of business and collaboration tools that need to be integrated into the particular system here. And I think Linden Lab, in terms of re-architecting what's going on here, they really do need to open up the APIs or to start building APIs in order to allow web services, to allow people to include add-ons into this particular environment. And I think they need to start looking at acquiring different patentable technologies. I think they have to stop this over-reliance on open source and start going out there and either making or acquiring patentable technologies that they can bring in and make part of the service.
Well, Phelan, have you heard of Rivers Run Red?
Yeah.
Apparently they did something, Graham Mills is saying that they did something like that, but to no great effect.
But you see, patents themselves are the currency for where you're going to get return on investment out of this. So even if you don't, let's say Linden Lab buys up a pile of patents and Second Life eventually goes nowhere. I mean, at least the investors can get some return on investment, because what do all the larger corporations want? They don't care what your customer base is. They don't care about all this other stuff that what they're doing. They want to know, what do you have that I can exploit? And that's knowledge, that's money, that's resources, and resources quite often translate into things like patents. So I think it would be a wonderful move to a certain extent if Linden Lab were to go out and buy out Unity. And I know the Unity community will probably be sitting there going, heaven forbid. But could you imagine if we could bring some of the Unity tools into Second Life and have those available, easily accessible to the residents inside this environment? Not only that, but the ability to then extend this to any platform in terms of mobile, PS3s, Xboxes, tablets, the whole works. I mean, Unity's got that whole engine built into it. So why are we trying to recreate it here? Why don't we, right? Why don't we just acquire it and then bring it into the environment here? One of the other things that really needs to happen, if they're going to stimulate innovation from businesses and educational groups and others who work inside collaborative spaces, right? We don't have the proper management tools within here. Everybody talks, when we talk about intellectual property, everybody talks about intellectual property from an individualistic point of view. But the reality is that most intellectual property is held through corporations. So they're held through, Pepsi and Coke and Microsoft and Yahoo and all these other places that are out there. And so, when you have, right, if you decide that you're going to bring your business in and you're going to bring your 500 employees in here, right, you want to be, as an organization, you want to be able to have some control over what happens. If you are a teacher, you want to bring 35 students into this particular environment, you want to have some control over what happens with those avatars. There is no hierarchical structure which allows a corporation to basically say, I as a corporate entity own and manage the following avatars and all the asset inventory that sits inside those avatars. And yet that's exactly what both business, education, and other organizations need in order to use this particular environment effectively. And those tools are just simply not available. Right? That's one of the reasons why business went running. It was because they'd have people that would come in here, they would develop a whole pile of stuff for them, and then they would, some other company would say, "Oh, come work for me." Right? And now all of a sudden, well, who owns all the stuff that they built? Right? If you're working from IBM and all of a sudden you get hired by Deloitte, what happens to that inventory? Who owns it? Is it IBM? Is it the person? Is it Deloitte? Right? Well, according to Linden Lab, it's the individual. According to IBM, it's sort of like, no, that's ours. Right? And there are no policies, there's no procedures in place for dealing with those particular types of issues. You can't put yourself out there as being a collaborative platform that will work for both individuals and businesses, so long as you have those particular types of situations that are ongoing, right? Those have to all be resolved. I love the idea in terms of, I think Dad was mentioning this in terms of this becoming a learning environment. I do think that Linden Lab needs to find some type of a hybrid mechanism in here which would allow both social engineering by the residents in terms of what's going on and some type of basic MMO type features to the platform that would allow people to slowly get accustomed to the tools and the power in which this environment is capable of. I mean, to throw everything at them at once. I mean, even when they tried to simplify down the viewer system, it really sort of didn't work. But yet, what does seem to work, I mean, you look at World of Warcraft, you look at EVE Online, you look at Minecraft, you look at all these other different places that are out there. And, I hate to use the word quest, right? But essentially, right, what sort of needs to happen is people need to be brought into this gradually, such that the learning curve appears to be fun and not appears to be a trial. Right. So I think there needs to be, and I don't have a good recommendation for this right at the moment, but I think there does need to be some blending of those two aspects.
Well, that's a good point. That's a good place to actually ask everybody to throw their mics open, and let's just kind of go for free exchange. We got about a couple minutes left, and I'll throw in any questions I see from the audience, but just everybody go in.
I'd like to second, this is Tab, I'd like to second what Phelan was saying and add the following. I think we all feel fortunate that Linden Labs and Second Life is still around. It's almost amazing they haven't augured in by this point in time. And when you look at it, started with a bunch of programmers that is almost an extended laboratory experiment. It's clear, and this isn't, again, it's not a criticism, but they just were not prepared for the success that they experienced. I was giving a talk on the New Media Consortium SIM the day that the millionth avatar joined, and I was in touch with Robin Harper, and I said, "Oh God, it must be exciting there." And she said, it's a mess. It's terrible. Avatar bodies are just piling up on incoming islands, and everyone's going crazy. And I said, "Well, you're riding the rocket to success." And she says, "No, it feels more like we're falling off the cliff of failure." And so I think we all have to both give Linden Lab some support and some understanding, but also to insist that they move forward and fix the code, write the things, get the environment so that we can do what we want to do and experience what we want to experience. And just sort of enough is enough. They need to get people managing the company, and hopefully we have that now, that know what they're doing, that know what Second Life is. I've heard 3 CEOs of Linden Labs say, "I have no idea why Second Life is successful. I have no idea what the secret, the magic of Second Life is." I'd like to see a CEO in there that does, and it sounds like we do have one now. Let's really support them. Let's really push, but also help as we move forward in sort of the spirit of being glad that it's still around, but knowing that it's not perfect and we can all do better.
So I have to hear Botgirl followed by Will on this.
All right. I think the best way to predict the future is to pay attention to the present. And we live in a time when we watch movies on 5-inch phones instead of 50-inch televisions, and we shoot with pocket phones instead of our SLRs. We move seamlessly, unconsciously from device to device, from app to app, from context to context. And that's the direction that technology seems to be going. So the likeliest future I see for a successful virtual world medium is to somehow groove into that space, to make it part of our toolkit of apps that we can hit on different devices in different contexts and in different ways. I think that some of the technology advances, such as some of the gesture-based and voice-based interfaces, some of the Google Glass type wearable products. The movie Her had a really incredible vision of future tech interface, which I think would be worth seeing. So that's my big question. In a way, virtual worlds are almost a throwback. This paying full attention for hours at an end to one thing, compared to how we move between many things. So that's my question mark and kind of my very soft vision.
So Will, go ahead.
Meanwhile, over here in this chair, my thought is actually mostly in line with Tab and Botgirl, and again, probably with Phelan. We're all usually on the same page, and I agree with most of what they have to say. Maybe some slight caveat, like my idea of the future. If you want to know where the future is going, it's a combination of the present and the past. Because we like our comfort zones. We like doing things that are familiar. And sometimes that works. Sometimes we iterate. And sometimes that gets us into trouble because we're doing things a little bit too familiar. We fall into that rut. So if you want to see what the future will be, we look at the present today and we say, what are we doing now? You look at things like, I don't know, Google, great example of, making a platform that just happens to be relevant across so many different use cases that have that look nothing like each other. You have the apps and services that just happen to work on tablets, that happen to work on glass, that happen to work in your self-driving car and your maps. I mean, these guys are really pushing that Internet of Things, that interconnectivity of the I might have an avatar, in this context, it would be like I would have an avatar or a virtual worlds persona, but it happens to be relevant to my messenger. At some point they had a messenger, standalone. That should be around again. I mean, because that's relevant to my phone, that's relevant to my tablet. I don't necessarily need the full-on experience. I just need to keep in touch and and do my groups and stuff like that. That's useful. So it's context sensitive. It's what do I really need it for? Does it look like an AR system? Yeah, it's a platform. Does it look like lock? It's a sandbox. I mean, that's what we have here is a sandbox without a publish button. Um, if they added that publish button and added the couple of widgets that a game developer is used to, this could be a viable development platform for gaming. It could still be the same platform. You'd have your open-ended stuff like we have now, but you'd be able to do stuff like a good example is Abby when he was presented with the esports question. He went, he goes, what the hell is esports? I don't even know what that is. Well, stuff like VTOX and Symbol and NFL and and all these NASCAR and all this other stuff. That kind of stuff. And it's not really a feature request on that aspect. It's more along the lines of, do you empower them in that context? And if you did empower them to make those published kind of sims where you can lock it down like a real development, real game development, you would be able to attract outside developers, indie developers and stuff to come in here and use this as a platform to create a game experience, because they'd have those tools they're familiar with. They'd be able to import their stuff. They'd be able to do weather, lighting, and zones. And this is why I say I like zones. They go, well, we don't need to do that. Yeah, you do. If you're going to be if you have people in here doing games, or you need a more robust experience, or you need to be able to control the environment better, you need that stuff. Those are things that game developers in the real world are used to. Defining their zones, defining their lighting points, and all that other stuff, and then hitting publish. You know why? Because I don't need to move the chair around once it's a published game. I could unlock it later and edit it, but that's the sort of thing that would optimize a sim, optimize things, and allow people to do that. So that's an example of platform empowering the future, in different contexts. That's how I see that future. I see that as, yes, absolutely, this thing needs a rewrite. That's what killed or kills most open-ended virtual worlds. We see the whole history littered with it. I can go through Worlds Inc. Same problem. They needed a rewrite, and the rewrite that they got, they threw away, which baffles me. And they went into obscurity and became patent trolls. And Active
Oh
Worlds
my
ended up in
goodness,
the same.
sounds like
Active Worlds did the same thing. And
it
it's
sounds like
everything.
VisiCalc all over.
Yeah, and it does it. So Second Life does need that rewrite, by all means.
I really hate to do this. It is my painful duty to close out this conversation. I really want to thank Tab Scott, Botgirl Questi, Will Burns, and Phelan Corrimal for their input on this question of the past, present, and future of Second Life and other virtual worlds. I especially want to thank Bevan Whitfield for putting this together as a wonderful panel. Letty and company, there's just too many people on the VWBPE work that have just gotten all of this working beautifully. And that brings us to the close of this featured panel. Thank you all very much.
And we're off there. Oops.